Hey there, welcome to Classroom 5.0, a podcast helping you to design a future of learning, work, and leadership that's both personally meaningful and creates impact for a better world. I'm your host, Mariane Power, and I'm thrilled you're joining me for another episode of our Inclusive Impact series. You can expect topics and interviews that deep dive into what it takes to build a truly diverse and equitable world, and learn science-backed skills and soul-filled strategies helping our different kind of difference makers to thrive. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of our homeland, Virpai Country, where this podcast was recorded, and pay our respect to elders past, present, and emerging. It's a pleasure and a privilege to play, live, and work on country, and I'm so glad you're here. So let's dive on in to today's episode. Dr. Cree Scott, thank you so much for joining us. I remember when I first saw your work on LinkedIn, a colleague had popped up your LinkedIn learning course, and I went, oh, this is exactly what we need. All the tips and tricks and tools for hard conversations. I'm so excited for you to share some of your tips. Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, thank you for having me. I definitely feel like I have been on a journey here through going through this LinkedIn course and then just all of the things that I've been doing in my business. So I'm excited to share and to talk more about the journey.
Yeah, journey's a really good word, actually. We're going to get there. But before we do, take us back a step. I'm really curious to hear about your career origin story and what brought you into psychology.
Yeah. So I think, when I first thought about this question, it was really around when was I first introduced to the concept of what psychology was, and that was actually
Mm.
in high school. So there was an elective that they brought someone in from the outside and decided to offer it through my high school. And I remember
Wow.
sitting in the classroom thinking like, oh my goodness, like I can learn how to like understand people better. Sign me up, especially as a high school student, right? You're thinking you're gonna control
Yeah.
my course, right? But
No,
it
well,
was a
I'm actually thinking, wow, because we've only just introduced psychology as a subject recently in Australia. Had I had the opportunity, that would have been really cool. So that's where the wow was coming from.
yeah, no, it was really nice, and it was literally my last year of high school where I was just like, oh, okay, this is definitely something that I enjoyed, and I just every single day I looked forward to going to class. So I kind of figured at that point that I there was something there. My parents didn't really talk to me about that I could be a psychologist, but I think from that point I recognized that there was a degree in psychology, not even thinking about being a doctor of psychology, but just I want to study this. And when I got to school, that was what I chose to study. And then from there, I recognized pretty early in my program that in order to actually make a living off of being a psychologist, I had to go get a higher education. So that's really the trajectory of how I got to be a psychologist. I went to school for undergrad at Howard University part time, and then ended up changing over to University of Cincinnati, and that's where I graduated from. And then I got my doctorate from Xavier University in Cincinnati, and then moved a lot. I'll say that. But today, my husband and my daughter and I are living in Atlanta, Georgia.
And I've realized I don't think I've asked you what your doctorate was on. What's your PhD covering the subject?
Yeah, it's actually a PsyD, and it's a doctor of psychology, and it's in clinical, just general clinical work. So I didn't have a specific focus when I was in graduate school, but after graduate school, I did a focus for my internship and my postdoc in forensics.
Wow, you really are across the board then, because that was one of the things that really struck me as well. And I know you and I had a conversation prior to this one about that journey that we'll talk about, moving from the clinical psychology space of traditional one-to-one service and care for our clients or patients, and then into more executive leadership work and your consulting work and your coaching work. And I know a lot of our listeners are really interested in, I'm just going to say generically, the helping space, how to help humans be good humans and get the best out of their full potential. But could you tell us a little bit from your perspective, what are some of the different categories, if you like, of helping? So coaching, psychology, forensics, now we could throw in counseling, that you see in terms of your journey that's working well for you.
So it's really interesting because when I was in graduate school, I thought for sure this is what I'm doing for the rest of my life.
Mm.
And and I didn't understand. I had not been introduced to the concept of executive coaching yet. We had an industrial organizational psychology program, and so they probably were the closest, right, to doing executive coaching. But even then, they were more focused on, the psychometrics of what, hiring and things of that sort. So it wasn't the same. I think what happened is that over time, I recognized that therapy felt heavy to me.
Hmm. Hmm.
I was trying to figure out like what's going to be the framework that I lay my foundation on. And so I chose cognitive behavioral therapy, which is
Hmm.
very, forward thinking. And then when I
Hmm.
started to understand that there is a whole world of what we call positive psychology out there, I
Yeah.
think that was right the first time where I felt like I had met my people, because I
Amazing.
never could really get like all the theorists and all of the
Yeah.
the theories in psychology sometimes felt very, just like I said, heavy, and it was
Mm.
illness led,
Mm.
and so
Mm.
it was really hard for me to see around the corner of how to help people get out of that. And I remember thinking that I was just like, oh, well, I mean, I know I want to be a psychologist, but I want to do it in a fun way. And this is heavy.
Mm.
This is like real life, like I felt like I was adulting way too soon. I ended up, doing forensics because that probably was like the most romanticized version of psychology that I could think of. Like, watching television and things of that sort, and thinking about like how people's minds really think, like the worst of the worst. Like, how are they thinking? How did we
Yeah,
get there?
talking about going heavy. I mean, you've gone from heavy to like dun dun dun.
Like, we're gonna do it. Let's do it.
But fascinating. Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, so I did that thinking that, it was going to, and it was. I will tell you that I had some really wonderful experiences in forensics, despite the fact that there were some heinous things happening in the space.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I learned so much. Like, to be an expert witness, I can tell you that you definitely need to know how to carry yourself and how to answer
Oh
questions
yeah.
and how to really think about things in a way to help other people get there as well. So I think that was
Absolutely.
probably the first time that I had to start to think for the other person to make sure that I was saying the
Hmm.
right things. I was working with a lot of attorneys at the time. I was working with the court system, and it really kind of took me a little bit away from the traditional psychology at that point, right? Because I had even thought about getting a JD instead of what
Wow.
I was doing. I was like, oh, I could be an attorney, like you have to know me to understand me, but I am a free spirit. So
You sound like this is obviously why we've connected. I love it. I'm often referred to being a multi-potentialite because people say, "What do you do?" I'm like, lots of things.
everything, I'm doing everything.
That's
I know
it. That's
what
it.
the universe allows me to do. How about that?
Beautiful. I
So
love that.
yeah, and so I think from there, and me getting into consulting was purely by, I'm going to call it. I know that that was the universe doing its work. The universe sets us on a path, and we end up getting there, but we don't know that we're on this path until like we look back, and we're like, oh wow, this is why I'm here.
Mm.
So,
Hmm.
so what happened is I got burned out in the job that I was
Mm.
in. I was working with the Department of Defense as a contractor, and while I loved every moment of helping the individuals that I was helping, they
Mm.
had some really serious mental illness, and there were a lot of
Yeah.
suicidal behaviors and things of that sort.
Hmm.
And we even had an accidental overdose, things of that sort, like things that
Yeah,
happen in
it's
the
full
military
on.
here in the
Yeah.
U.S. all the time. And I remember just thinking like, "Oh, I need a break from this. Like,
Mm.
this is like really heavy." So I had moved from like forensics to working with the Department of Defense, and now it's just kind of like, let's see something different. And so that
Mm.
was the first time that consulting had been introduced to me. And I still don't think that executive coaching was quite there yet. Like, it was only for CEOs, and that was it. Like, if you weren't a CEO, you weren't getting coaching. But there was this whole thing around career coaching, or and
Okay.
this whole strengths based era, and all of those things that was kind of coming out and emerging as I got
Yeah.
into consulting. And so I started to like look there. And I think
Mm.
the combination of positive psychology, and I was also looking at some of the other things in business that really are aligned to human behavior and how to help people, lead other people and how to influence people.
Mm.
All the things that there are psychological and behavioral underpinnings too. I
Mm.
just like leapt on those. Like I found my path and I was just like, oh, I can still help people here.
Yeah.
I can learn, I can teach people how to do all the things that I do as a psychologist in the business world. And so that's
Mm.
really how the transition happened. And once I figured that out, it was like there was no stopping me. So
Amazing. And I imagine that strategic lens as well as you were speaking, because I know we're going to talk a little bit about the type of work that you're doing today in the defense force and military in particular, but then also in the court, needing, as you mentioned, to hold yourself, to ground yourself, to really be present centered, that emotional intelligence, and that strategy of it is a strategic play when I think you're representing somebody or you're defending somebody or you're standing in as a witness. I imagine that's really served you well. And I was also reflecting as well, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to have to dive back into my sort of positive psychology history, but I think Angela Duckworth's work, in terms of grit was really unpacked and uncovered in the military. And similarly with the strengths with Peterson and Seligman, I mean, the military kind of know what they want to pick up, right, when it comes to positive psychology. So you were onto something there, I think, Cree. Right where it needs to be happening.
right
Absolutely.
where
And so they
I was
should. They're doing very important work.
well, my dissertation was on resilience,
Huh.
and at the time, I don't necessarily know if they were calling it resilience, but that's what the dissertation was about. I think we were
Interesting.
calling it hardiness.
Mine was also
That's
on
a hard.
cognitive hardiness. Yeah,
Look how
Kenneth
far
Noack's
back I
work.
go. We were calling it
Yeah, yeah,
hardiness.
yeah. Oh wow, we must be of similar similar age, I think, in that way. Yes, no, mine was in youth actually, cognitive hardiness and well-being and fostering of purpose. So there you go, Kenneth
Oh,
Noack's.
so mine
Yeah,
was about the youth as well. Mine was
there
on youth.
you go.
It was specifically on youth of substance abusing parents. So one of the parents
Wow.
were substance abusers, and in this study that the University of Cincinnati actually was doing, and they allowed me to
Yeah.
collect research and use it as part of my dissertation. But yeah, like it was about hardiness and what were the key factors that made it so that some of those children went on to thrive and others not so much.
I'm so curious, did you uncover anything? Was there a point of differentiation between those who thrived and those who really struggled?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing that we talk about today is that support system. 100% was the wraparound support and the family and also the tertiary services that people received as their parents were in and out of the system and how what the level of stability they were able to maintain based on that support system for sure. But I am still a because I think I come from a different camp than some people. There is still
Yeah.
that something else, right? The
Yeah.
things that people don't like to talk about, right? Because they're just like, you can teach resilience. And yes, 100% you can teach resilience. There's
Mm.
still something, there's an essence of something inside of certain people that is more
Mm.
nature versus nurture.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that, that's so controversial. I usually don't even really bring it up often because people are just like, oh, you're just basically saying you're born that way. And I'm just like, well, I'm not saying you're born that way, but we all have our personalities. And there's some hardier people that are born into this world and
Mm.
others not so much. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't learn the skills, but there is an essence that I saw in some of those kiddos that I'm just like, you're going to be okay no matter what happens.
Oh, you've given me tingles. I foo like this is where the woo woo meets the work, right? Hence the controversy.
Exactly, the
Yes.
controversy.
Absolutely. Do you know what's really interesting? Because I love to land this stuff in science, and there are some really beautiful practitioners, I think, that are doing a great job of that. I've talked often about, I don't know if you Dr. Tara Schwartz's work, as she's written the source, and I've just like gone in my own headspace here. So let me help you catch up to where Maz is. I'm talking about that intersection of spirituality and then science, and then, what's that special spark? And is that something that's nature, as you said, biologically? Is there something there that's of an essence? And it's so fascinating to see some of that research and conversation emerging. But some research I was reading recently, actually, to completely digress, on what makes people with ADHD, because within our community there's a fair amount of vulnerability to factors such as mental health and significant struggle. And yet there's a proportion of people that actually really thrive with ADHD. So this particular research was looking at, well, what are those factors? One, relationships, not really surprised there. Secondly, exercise, again, not really surprised there. The third factor was spirituality. And yet,
Yeah.
yeah. And as somebody who's dedicated, my career to studying meaning and purpose, I went, ta-da! All the lights went off. I'm like, of course, it makes sense. I'm ADHD. I'm studying meaning and purpose, but I just go wild that it's not a section of psychology that is really highlighted, and oftentimes, at least myself in Australia, go, oh, don't talk about spirituality. That's that woo woo stuff. When it's
Yeah.
not. It's just
It's
yeah,
not.
it's
No, I
fascinating.
agree with you. So you say that, and I think I might have mentioned this to you, but that's what I'm writing my first book, and that is exactly what it's about. So it's
Huh?
about intersection between um, your intra connection between you and yourself, right, and then the
Yes.
interpersonal connection between you and others, and that intersection with transcendent connection of some sort. So you need to have all three in order to be a holistic leader.
I
I
love
focus
that.
on leadership because that's just my audience, but I really do think you need all three as a person, right? Like, and so
Hmm.
that's what the book is about, and hopefully I'll get a chance to write it this year. We'll see.
I knew you were writing a book. I did not know what it was about. I would have definitely remembered that one. That is so exciting. Wow. Okay, we could riff on this for ages. I'm going to have to bring you back about this book. But let's
Yes,
speak about some of the
absolutely.
work. I would love that. I would love that. Let's speak about some of the work that you have been doing, which obviously transcendent leadership we can throw in the mix there. I want to ask you today, though, also, this series is about inclusive impact. And a lot of the listeners and some of the people I coach as well talk to me a lot about some of the barriers that they find when they're trying to move the needle on creating more inclusive cultures at work. Oftentimes, one of the biggest barriers that are shared are around the people that they work with's mindset, being quite set or quite rigid. In psychology, we talk about unconscious bias, but for a lot of our listeners, that might be a new term. And I know it's something that you speak to and teach to. Could you give us a little bit of insight into what unconscious bias is and how it might be playing into this piece around inclusivity and diversity as well?
Absolutely. Well, I spend a lot of my time in the DEI space, and one of the things that I always try to do is bring us together before I separate us, because
Mm,
the biggest things around DE&I is that many of the people who do this work forget that there's a lot of shame and guilt in DE&I.
mm,
And as a psychologist, I try to remove that. So I start off by laying a foundation of the fact that we all have unconscious bias. This is not something that one specific group of people hold over the other.
mm-hmm,
And that's just my way of trying to bring us all together to humanize the fact that we are flawed individuals, right? Like we're
mm,
humans, and that's
mm,
okay. And that actually unconscious bias is a way for us to survive in the world. It's not meant to harm other people. It just
mm,
becomes harmful when we don't put it in check and when it runs amok, right? So I
mm.
talk about it from a space of coming together, and we're all in this together. We all have those unconscious biases in which we make these very quick decisions, and they're
Mm-hmm,
basically automatic mental shortcuts, if you will. And they are
mm,
really much influenced by our background, our cultural experiences, our personal experiences, and they impact our perceptions and our decisions even when we're not realizing it. So the big
yeah.
thing about understanding unconscious bias is to be self-aware. And
Mm,
when you have that self-awareness, then you know when you are in fact being um, when there is a decision being made based on bias. And if you can pay
mm,
attention to that, then you will more than likely catch it before it becomes something that is I would say most people are not purposely trying to harm other people. And there
mm,
are a group of people who are, but for the people, the regular human out there,
mm.
their unconscious bias are not necessarily aimed to harm, but sometimes we just have to make sure that they keep in check. That's all.
Yeah, it's that self-awareness piece, that catching it. And it's not about assuming that you'll never have bias again. It's more
That's right.
about being aware of that bias creeping in and then almost redirecting, would you say? What would be the next step?
Yes. So first and foremost, the self awareness is important, but then asking yourself questions to make sure that
Mm,
you are in fact gathering the right evidence. Because many times,
mm,
because they're mental shortcuts, we don't have enough evidence to say that we should be thinking that way. Asking questions and being curious is something that I
mm.
think is really important, and that's where you really get to the learning. And you can uncover some different perspectives that way. It's when you stop asking questions and allow your biases to make your decisions for you without
Mm.
getting the right information to ensure that it's actually accurate, that's when it becomes an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder, could you give us an example? I can think of one in the neurodiversity space. Can you think of an example that might come up in a workplace around a topic of maybe conversation or relevance at the moment that you're seeing in organizations where unconscious bias might get in the way of people taking appropriate action or having those, important, compassionate conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, and this, there's so many examples. So I want to come up with something that can kind of cut across everyone. But I would say
Yeah.
that if you're thinking about, for example, in the U.S., we'll have people who are from different countries with an accent, and
Hmm.
there will be an assumption that because you look different and you do have an accent, that you actually were not born here in the U.S. And so there is
Mm.
people that will approach someone and said, and ask them, where are you from? And
Mm.
the person will say like, oh, I'm from California. And they'll
Hmm.
go, oh, but no, where are you really from? And they'll go,
Ah.
I was born and raised in California. And so that's the bias of you have an accent. There is no way if you have an accent that you can live in the US and be an American citizen. Only people
Mm.
who are American citizens have, certain ways of speaking, and we know that
Mm.
that's just not true. So
Mm.
that's just one example of people having the idea that something looks a certain way. It's their mental shortcut again to say like,
Mm.
if you are American, then this, right? It's your decision making tree. And so, but when you and instead of asking someone about themselves and saying like,
Mm.
tell me more about yourself, and
Yeah.
making assumptions, right?
Yeah.
That there's just no way, it kind of cuts off the conversation, right? Because now this person is like, I just told you where I'm from. And now we
Hmm.
can't move forward in the conversation because you're stuck in your bias.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that's a beautiful, brilliant, concrete example. If you're a leader of a business or in charge of a team of people, then chances are you're probably in the thick of getting up to speed on Australia's new psychosocial safety legislation. By law, companies now need to do what they can to protect their people against stress and burnout. But my question to you is that in creating your policies, procedures, and programs, are you accounting for the different kinds of brains in your workplace? Because stats would suggest maybe not. In the tech sector, for example, 54% of people identify as neurodivergent. And yet, when we ask employers what they think that number is, they report back 3%. Now, that gap poses a significant problem because without specialized understanding of neurodiversity, traditional policies and programs risk missing the mark, leading to higher instances of burnout, stress, and both physical and mental health challenges and outcomes for our community. But understanding neurodiversity is more than just compliance, it's also about unlocking innovation. You see, diverse companies are 70% more likely to attract new markets and 36% more profitable than homogenous ones. I personally believe that neurodivergent leaders are the different kind of difference makers that our world needs right now. That's why I'm so excited to be launching the Neuro Impact Network. We're changing the game for neurodiversity leadership and bringing both our neurodivergent leaders and allies together in a neuro-inclusive online community space where we can share science-backed strategies that support legal compliance and equip us with everything we need to be able to build neuro-inclusive workplaces. Plus, peak performance and human flourishing science strategies that ensure we thrive and protect our mental health, alongside community events so that we can truly connect and share one another's strengths, wins, and challenges along the way. Neurodivergent leaders, listen up. I really believe this is our time and our space to shine, and it's such a privilege to be welcoming you into this space. So if it sounds like something that's for you, if you're ready to say goodbye to burnout and hello to innovation that actually delivers impact, I'd love to see you on the inside. Everything you need for the applications, which are now open for founding members, are in the link below. I look forward to seeing you there. Speaking of inclusion, in terms of that diversity and inclusion sort of area that I know you play a lot in, is there a conversation? I'm curious about this difference across cultures as well. We've got a few that are kind of like hot right now, if you like, or trending topics in DEI, which sounds terrible, but everybody seems to jump on a bandwagon at particular
Yeah.
times. And definitely, at least from my lens here in Australia, I could see post-COVID there was an acceleration, which is really exciting, about particular social movements and causes, and people becoming more attuned and more aware that there's a need to ask questions and get curious and support one another. What's happening over on your part of the world, though? What are you noticing in that DEI work that's exciting you at the moment?
Yes, so many things. Well, this month is Mental Health Awareness Month here. So we
Hmm.
talk a lot about health equity and mental health equity and thinking about how to get those, marginalized communities into spaces in which they can receive the care that they deserve. So
Yeah.
that's been a huge topic, especially this month,
Hmm.
and making sure that services are geared toward multicultural services, not just a specific group of people, and
Hmm.
thinking about
Hmm.
accessibility for
Yeah.
people who may be stuck in rural areas, all kinds of things from that perspective. So really just thinking holistically, not just about mental health, but just about healthcare in general. That's been a brewing topic for a while. But there's been this huge thing in the US going on around human sustainability. And
Mm.
and that word is big because it means a lot more than just making sure that humans have well-being, but then we're talking about environmental things as well, and making sure that we're
Mm.
taking care of our environment. There's always the controversy of, is global warming real or not, and whether or not we can sustain the way in which we are living and taking from the earth. And of
Mm.
course I have my ideas, but it is very polarizing to have a conversation. So I
Wow.
tend
Is
to,
that right?
yes, here in the US it's amazing, right? Like there's science
Yeah,
behind it. But
again, it still blows my mind. I mean, we sort of talk about it being polarizing here, but I would say that the majority of people are very accepting of global warming here in Australia,
wow.
and the impact on our climate. Yeah, so that's really
It is,
interesting to hear.
I
Yeah.
wish I could say the same here.
Wow.
There are some people who say it's not real. I
Wow.
don't understand, but that's not for me to judge. I know that everybody comes from a different background. For some people, they still think the world is flat, right? So, there are the people. So,
Mm.
but what happens is that what we've been having a conversation about more recently is because of all of the workforce reductions and with
Mm.
the advent of AI, not that it's just coming on, but it's really
Mm.
exploding, right?
Taking off.
Uh,
Yeah.
that it is, what are we going to do for our employees as we move
Mm.
forward in the workforce? And how are we going to set up systems to ensure that we are really looking at the holistic way of serving our, not just our organization's bottom line. So it's no
Mm.
more around that. It's around like the employees who are going to be left behind to do
Mm.
this work. How are we going to make sure that their labor is protected? Their labor rights are
Mm.
protected, and making sure that there is a workplace culture that prioritizes well-being over
Mm-hmm.
mere output, and making
Mm.
sure that people have jobs to go to, and that
Mm.
AI doesn't become a thing where it's just so coming so quickly that people don't understand the impact of taking jobs away on our capitalistic society that we live in, and how it will
Yeah.
really impact our economy. So those are things that I hear a lot about when I am, talking to other leaders, when I'm talking to
Mm.
corporations who are experiencing, this shift in the way in
Yeah.
which they work, and all the people who are left behind with this workforce reduction,
Yeah.
they're feeling very stressed out, and their well-being is at risk right now. So finding ways to make sure that organizations understand that we get, that we're in a different economic downturn than we have been in the past. But then
Mm.
what do you do for the people who are left to still, make sure that your lights are on and that your products are being made and so forth? What do you do with their well-being and to ensure that they're taken care of as well? So lots of
Mm.
conversations here for sure.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And as you're talking, a few things have come to mind. It doesn't feel like that long ago where the conversation was more around, we need talent. Where is all the talent hiding? Please look under a rock. And now I'm hearing that there's a really quick shift towards, we need to say goodbye to people. There's this whole new technology we can utilize instead. How do we balance that change and shift of people demand versus productivity? I hadn't heard of the term human sustainability. I feel like maybe that means there might be a shift from there being conversation about the triple bottom line, which for people who aren't familiar, that was sort of the introduction or the business call that not only do we need to look for profit, but we need to look after our people and our planet in terms of business value. There's an extra edge there now with the introduction of AI. So it's profit, it's people, it's planet. Are you saying that there's an extra, or are we still talking about how do we look after our people in this piece? Is that sort of amplified, do you think, in terms of those values?
Yes, I definitely think that it's amplified, and I think because people are starting to push back. Um,
Mm,
there was at one point in time, I agree that people were kind of doing the quiet quitting, but
yeah,
people were kind of just, like I'm going to come to work and do my job. And now
yeah,
you can come to work and do your job, but there's so much of your job to do. And I think that
right,
people are starting to figure out like, this is never ending. Like you're always going to give me 80 hours of work, right? And so, but
right.
I only want to work 40 hours because that's what I get paid to do. And
Mm,
there's just this whole idea of, at what point in time do we go back to the times in which we were able to just have our regular working day with the right amount of
mm,
resources to ensure
mm,
that people can still get their job done, but
mm.
without over overburning.
Yeah,
And I think
100%.
that's the biggest thing right now is just I think a lot of people are feeling low morale and a
Mm,
lot of stress when it comes to I have so much to do and I don't have any resources to do it with. So it's
yeah.
that energy management of making sure that, I can do this.
Yeah, there seems to be, this is just a Maz thing. I'm curious to hear your observations as well, Cree, but there seems to be a frenetic pace that really concerns me for our next generation. And at the same time, it excites me about our next generation because I see a little bit of pushback from them as well. I recently held a workshop with our 18 to 25-year-old demographic. It was called Be Your Own CEO. And the young women who came were all standing in that space of, I don't want to be on social media anymore. I don't want to subscribe to these rules that I have to slog myself up the chain and then be at somebody else's mercy. And so we were exploring all these beautiful, human capabilities and looking at strengths and all the wonderful things that you do when you're at that age and point in time. But it really got me reflecting. Here I am in my early 40s, kind of just watching a lot of my peers head down that hole, and it is a really dark black hole when you head down there. Like there is always more to do, especially with AI and exponential technologies taking off. And it's got me thinking, again, I digress, but I want to pull us back to your work in inclusive leadership.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll be fast tracking us ahead in this conversation because I'm tying the knots, tying to the pieces together of your book as well. I've been hypothesizing that our next journey as a species, if you like, to get all evolutionarily speaking, is around transcendent leadership. And
Mhm.
as AI is pushing more of these sort of get the job done skills, where does that position us as humans? We've talked about emotional intelligence, we've talked about agility, and then of course we've got our other intelligent quotients. But I'm curious about your thinking with inclusive leadership, where that transcendent piece is coming in, and or is there something else that you notice in your inclusive leaders that you work with today? Like I see them as our little stars of guiding lights of what do we do, inclusive leaders? Share your special spark with us.
It's so funny that you say, inclusive leadership and transcendence because I feel like for a while diversity, equity, inclusion has been missing the belonging piece. And
Yeah.
so part of what I try to make sure that I'm talking about when I talk about DE&I is that, inclusion only goes so far. So
Mm,
inclusion is the invitation, right? So now that more demographics of marginalized groups have been brought into the workplace, how are you making sure that they feel like they belong, that they want to stay? Because I can invite you into
yeah.
my house, but then when you
Yes.
get there, if I don't treat you right, then you
And
want
you
to
don't
leave
feel
my house,
welcome. Right.
right? So
Yeah.
the idea here is that it's so much more than just the word inclusion, and I think that we
Mm,
get we get really caught up in the fact, and a lot of leaders do. I am inviting. We're hiring, and
Yes. We're
they're in
ticking
the
our
meeting. We're
boxes.
on the team, right?
Yeah, we're meeting our targets.
I
Yeah.
get it. Why are you still saying that I'm not doing something, right?
Yes. Look at all
And
these different people in my workforce.
absolutely,
Absolutely. I can line
don't
them
you
up for you.
see?
Yeah.
Don't you see? We have
Oh dear.
independent women,
That's
right?
right.
So it's really around the transcendent piece comes in for me because when you truly understand that it is that we're all interconnected, that there is
Mm,
a sense of connectedness through all humans, that's where
mm,
transcendence comes in to me, and that's where belonging comes in. Because if you already
mm,
have a tie to transcendence, belonging is not a leap for you. When you have no
mm,
transcendence and when you don't see that there's something bigger than us
mm,
and that we are all interconnected, it's really hard for you to make that leap. So you stay at inclusion. And that's where you are. And that's okay,
mm.
right? Everyone's on a different
Yeah.
journey. But if you're already kind of practicing and understanding and conceptualizing the world in a
Mm,
much bigger way than just you and I, and you can
mm,
see like the commonalities and the interconnectedness, belonging is so much easier for you to get to, and it makes it much easier for you to show up in a leadership way where you're pulling
mm,
people in a harmonious way too, in an
mm,
interconnected way where people feel like they have a seat at the table, that their voice matters, that their perspective is, even if it's dissenting from yours, is still welcomed, that
mm,
you are still going to accept them for who they are if they come looking different than you, right?
mm.
And if they like different music than you, or if they like a different food than you, then sometimes we're going to try different foods, right? Like, so it's this
Yeah.
whole part of, am I welcome as my authentic self? And
Mm,
are you going to say, no, I'll take this part of you, as long
mm,
as it assimilates into the culture that we're in. And so that's really the part about transcendence for me, is like understanding that we all kind of belong in different ways, and we
mm,
make beautiful colors together. And without one part, we're missing the bigger whole, right? So I just, I'm a real proponent of transcendence, and I can
mm.
talk to you about it all day. So yeah,
Oh,
I'll just there.
I'm so excited right now. People who know me in my personal life are going to be, Lord, they're all going to be singing. They're like, Maz has met one of her humans. This is so exciting. I've had the pleasure and the privilege of riffing with, do you know Zach Mercurio?
I don't,
Works a lot. Okay, I have to connect you both. Beautiful
yeah,
human, speaks a lot about purpose and meaning, and more recently, mattering in work. And he and I have had some beautiful conversations around this. And as you're speaking as well, Cree, I have to ask: have you read Dan Siegel's recent work and his concept of moi as well?
I've started but not
Started.
finished.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, similarly, I'm halfway through, but wow, everything you're speaking to, it just seems that there's a collective thinking that's emerging, which I'm really excited about because the time is absolutely now. If we don't all start working together synergistically, whew,
I know,
you know,
right?
nobody wants to see what's going to happen then. Like, what's the opposite of that? No, thank you. I'm sure there's some gray in between, but yes, interconnected all the way. Thank you very much. Beautiful. I have to also ask and put this in a system. We have gone so off script here, by the way. Are you okay with this? Oh, great. Okay, great. This is really exciting to me. So selfishly, I'm like soaking it all up. And hopefully our listeners will be too. I'm sure they will. Kickback. Tell me about the cynicism. And again, this is a really selfish question. I want to hear what you, as a leader working with leaders, do in terms of your decision making, triaging, if you like, around, do you work to pull the people who are on the other side of the fence across to sit on the fence and then maybe come across into understanding interconnectedness and the value of transcendence? And or do you say, you're not there yet, where do you start your work and where do you put your focus in this space? Because it is new, and I would say that it's still controversial, at least here in Australia.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't even think I use the word. I haven't even started using the word transcendence that often in
Huh.
the work that I do yet. Only
Okay.
because in corporations, they
Yes.
it's hard for them to receive it, right? So
Right.
because to
Okay.
your point, it's the woo woo, and
Yeah.
so I talk about I guess because when I was in corporate America and where I was, we had to be very careful about the words we said and some of the
Mm-hmm.
ways that we presented, the information that we were talking
Language
about.
matters. Yeah, 100%.
Yes, exactly. So I
Yeah.
have become really good at talking around things, but still talking about the thing. So
Yes. Okay.
that's
Great.
really what I do when I'm doing the work that I do is I talk around it. But
Yes.
the people and then I let someone else say it. I let someone else talk about it and what it means to
To
them, and
them.
so that it still goes through their own belief system and their meaning. But
Yes.
I'm not naming it for them because the minute that I name it for them, the minute that they reject it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I kind of allow
Mm-hmm.
people to come to it on their own, but I talk about
Mm.
the characteristics because here's the thing: the characteristics of transcendence are still very human, and we all want it. We
And we
all want
study
it.
it. It's in the
Yeah,
literature. Transcendent
absolutely,
emotions, joy, awe, purpose, meaning,
absolutely.
mattering, belonging, all there.
Yes,
Yeah.
all there. And we want it. Like everybody wants the same thing.
Yeah.
So I don't have to sell it per se. I just have to talk
Yes.
about it differently and find very creative ways to allow people to get there on their own. So I'm never ever the person that tells you like you have to do this or you have to think like this or this is the best
Yeah.
framework ever. I always say,
Yeah.
I try and I strive to be egoless. Like I don't need to be right because the universe
Mm.
has that. I don't need to be right. And so if
Mm.
that is the case, then I don't need to convince you of anything. I just need to share the information and let you do with it what you want. So that's kind of how I am
Mm.
in all of the workshops that I do, especially around transcendence and spirituality. It's just been one
Mm.
of those things where, but I always get people come to me after, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I needed. And I'm like, yes, I know, like we all need this. Like, so it
Yes.
makes sense, but sometimes you can't really talk about it directly in the way in which you want to when it comes
Yeah.
to, organizations. So that's okay.
Yeah, that's a beautiful point. Thank you for sharing. Really, we've all got the same language. As you're pointing out, we all want the same things, but depending on our frame of reference, if we're in science, for example, we might talk about the action of the reticular activating system. If we're into spirituality and all of the sort of the new age spirituality versions, we might be talking about manifesting. If we're in Eastern philosophies, we might be talking about meditation. It's the same practice that goes across
Yeah,
cultures. We're talking
yeah,
about the same experience, but depending on your frame of reference, and again, that comes down to that cultural intelligence piece, I think, of recognizing that we may have a shared human experience or human drive and human need, but how we get there in terms of our language heuristics and our shortcuts can look really different. So how incredibly
yeah.
skilled you are to be able to translate across the board to get to where we actually need to go. That's beautiful. I love that.
And I just want to bring people together. Like that's just really my goal. Like I have my ulterior motive is always to bring connection and not to separate. And there's just so much separation
Mm.
out there. So however I can do that, I can. If I need to speak a different language, then I will.
That is beautiful. I love that. I hope that's on your wall somewhere. I might put that as your words on my wall to remind me. Be like Cree. I think we could all be a little bit more like
Yeah,
Cree.
right.
Bring people together. Don't you shy away from that one. That is beautiful. I love that purpose statement. Well, speaking of purpose statements, are you ready for some quick fire rounds? I say they're quick, but I always leave 10 minutes because, we riff.
Yeah,
uh, Good. The first one I've got for you, we're asking the same set of questions across all our guests. And the first one is, what comes up for you when you hear the words impact mindset? Someone
yeah.
who'd have an impact mindset.
I the first thing that comes to mind is really having a life that is full of intention and commitment to
Mm,
making meaning and driving positive difference
mm.
in everything that you do. So your attitudes, your values, your behaviors, and it's really focused on creating that sustainable change and contributing to the well-being of others. So that's kind of what I think about from an impact mindset.
That's beautiful. I love that. There's a few extra pieces in that haven't been spoken to before. So thank you.
Ooh,
What
really?
about the idea of inclusive impact?
Yeah. So, and this goes back to my belonging statement, but really just
Yeah.
where all diverse perspectives are valued and integrated into the decision making process, ensuring like everybody has a voice at the table and opportunity to contribute. And this is
Mm,
really around designing what I kind of see as like these areas or these unique communities of people, not just from marginalized groups, from all over, and making
mm,
sure that we are really looking at how we can be more equitable and just throughout our entire society for a greater good. That's
mm.
inclusive impact to me.
Yes. Ah, I love that. I'm going to pull all of these answers together, by the way, so I can't wait to share them. But the piece about that that was extra for me that I haven't yet heard is that pulling it together. That we've talked a lot about everyone having a seat at the table, about conversations and the listening that needs to happen, and the equity, but that because we're all doing it for the same common good piece, that common humanity. Thank you. That's just beautiful. What about some books, podcasts, things that you read or listen to that inspire you? Have you got a top list for our readers who might want to pick up on this conversation?
Yeah. So I tend to reread a lot of the same books, and that probably says a lot about me. But
Oh,
so
I'm so curious to ask you more about that, actually. But yeah, go on. Which are your favorites?
I read I reread and read again Seed of the Soul. So Gary Zukav.
Mm,
I read and have reread Eckhart Tolle, all of pretty much all of his books really. But the one that I just started rereading is the Presence of Now. Um, and then from podcasts, I am just kind of all over the place. I don't think I really have a specific podcast that I read, I mean, that I listen to on a regular basis. I've been more so doing Audible, which is kind of like a version of a podcast because it's talking to me the
I
entire
love that.
time. But my, of course, my daughter, who is a real reader, she will say that is not reading, mommy. But
I love her. How old is she now?
she's 11. She
That's
reads like
brilliant.
3 books a month. Like she is a reader. She's a
Wow.
reader. I am
Amazing.
not there, nor do I have the time. But I do listen to a lot of just like short stories that are like The Alchemist. Things that are just like that have like
Mm,
that really short, meaningful. I am really one that I always want to hear a positive story. So
mm,
I'm always looking for those spirituality types of books or the ones that have the moral at the end, things of that sort. So that's really who I am as a person. I love just feeling that higher level of connectedness and like the joyous
mm.
feeling. So I'm always looking for content like that. So that's where you'll find me most of the time.
Oh, can we please do a book swap? And I promise for our listeners, I'll share them. Are you
Yeah,
talking about the alchemist Paulo Coelho's work?
yes,
Is that
yes,
yes? Oh my word.
yes.
His whole series I started when I must have been 16. And to your point, when I said, I'm so curious to hear more about why you reread things, I've found myself going back to those books and finding pockets of myself reflected in those words
Absolutely.
as I mature, but also being reminded of the younger version of me, which has power within itself. But for yourself, why do you return to books? I'm so curious. I have to ask.
I return to books because I always find a different meaning in it depending on the
Yeah,
point that I am in my life all the
yeah,
time. Like I read it through a different lens. Even though
yes,
I'm reading the same words, like it resonates differently. And I can
mm,
always find value every single time. There has never been a time that I've gone back and reread a book and not found some level of different understanding than I had before. So
mm,
it's just who we are, right? We miss
yeah,
things, and then we have more information, and when you get more
yes.
information, then you evolve as a thinker and a learner. So that's why.
Beautiful. Yeah, there are definitely some of those books that are just little soul connectors, I think. And what about in terms of what you'd like to see? This is a big question. Change in terms of our capacity to be able to build more inclusive communities, schools, workplaces. I mean, we've spoken to this the whole way through the podcast, but if you could wave a magic wand, what would change tomorrow?
Oh, I think the first thing that would change would be representation
Mm,
and role models that are at levels and in systems that are not there yet. I am so tired of hearing, oh, the first she was the first African American woman to do this, or the first Hispanic woman. Like, I'm
Mm.
over the first. I just want representation, so we don't have to keep saying this is the first time this has happened,
Yeah.
right? Like, we need representation. We need role models. We need to be a part of the conversation. We need a seat at the table, and we
Mm.
want to be a part of the conversation. So that open dialogue, those safe spaces that people can have these conversations without anger. I know there's a
Mm.
lot of hurt and pain there. I get it, but we have to really heal from this and move past the hurt and
Mm.
pain and start to forgive so that we can get to solutioning. And that's really where the representation has to come in. So we have to have those role models and representation in those places. That's where I would start.
Mm.
If it were me, if I could wave a magic wand.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And we need to do that at such exponential speed. To your point, let's move past the firsts. Thank you. That's beautiful. This is the big one. What comes to mind for you when you think of what it means to live a meaningful life?
Oh my goodness. What do I think?
I always
Um,
say we ask the big questions here, Cree.
you're asking some really big questions.
We don't
I
do the surface level
like,
skimming thing
ooh,
here.
that's okay.
Should we
Let
answer that one with read my book?
I know. Well, I was going to say, like, I think the biggest thing that I'm trying to think of is like it better tie back to spirituality here, right? Um,
It doesn't need to, by the way.
Okay, so seriously though, I really do envision a life that's filled with purpose, connection, and
Mm,
contribution. Like, those are the three things that I really do
beautiful.
focus my life on. And it's ultimately about me wanting to leave behind a legacy of, kindness, of growth, of positive change, and knowing that whatever actions that I have, however small they are, will contribute to a greater good and really
Mm.
do, I really want to create a ripple effect of inspiration and hope for my daughter and for future generations. Like, that's really all I want to do, because I am a hopeful person. So that's really where I am in terms of what it means to lead a meaningful life.
Thank you. Your hope has absolutely rippled through this conversation. And I know it's going to be a beacon for so many people listening. And I don't want that to sound cheesy, but seriously, thank you for bringing your light. It's magnetic. And I really appreciate you sharing so wholeheartedly, both with us in this conversation and I know in the incredible work you're doing. We didn't even touch on Serenity Sai. So I'm definitely
So
going to be putting that in our links. Quickly tell us a little bit about, because you're up to 4 years now of your consulting business. Congratulations. And
thank
that's, by
you.
the way, 4 years on top of so many years, as we've heard about today. But where can people follow up with you and learn more about your work, get you into their organizations and into their lives?
Yeah, so at Serenity, we do leadership development trainings, customized, but also off the shelf. We do executive coaching, we do team building as well. So you can find me easily on LinkedIn. That's probably the
Yes.
easiest way to get to me is to just send me a message on LinkedIn. But you can also find us at www.serenitysci.health.com. And you can send me a message there. And I am excited about working with anyone who is interested.
Beautiful. I'll pop those links in the show notes and also a link to your incredible LinkedIn learning course, which I said I have enjoyed myself and I know our listeners will too. Thank you again, Cree. It's been such a delight and a pleasure. And to our listeners today, thank you for joining in again and for your interest in all things to do with science and inclusive impact. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Classroom 5.0. If this episode sparked an insight for you, why not share it with a friend who might benefit too? Or spread the word by leaving your rating and review. I read every single one, and I promise your interest in impact means the world. Classroom 5.0 is brought to you by the Posify Group, a psychology coaching and consulting company specializing in neurodiversity and purpose-driven leadership, equipping today and tomorrow's leaders with the future skills and mindsets needed to thrive and create impact. To learn more about our work and to access today's show notes, links, and more episodes just like these, you can visit www.theposifygroup.com.au/podcast. I'll see you next time.